The views and opinions expressed on the following program are those of the host and guests and do not necessarily represent those of any organization, including One Generation Away.
The freedom of a people to choose its leaders is the root of liberty.
Keep alive this experiment in liberty.
Liberty, in case you've forgotten, is the soul's right to breathe.
Government should be very minimal in protecting liberty.
Peace cannot be purchased at the cost of liberty.
The sturdy ground of liberty.
Liberty once lost is lost forever.
Fight for their liberty and for our security.
Guarantees individual liberty.
This great republic, born alone in liberty.
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 Just how much do you want liberty?
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner,
a production of LibertyNation.com.
Cutting through the double talk, taking on the topics, going after what the politicians really mean, and making it all clear. For your freedom and your liberty. Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
From silly to serious, we break down the state of the Democratic Party as party leaders prepare for their fateful decision on whether to impeach the President of the United States. Welcome back into Liberty Nation Radio, a production of LibertyNation.com and heard from coast to coast on the Radio America Network. As we all recover from the joys and trials of Thanksgiving, we'll start with the silly, a hysterical rendition of the Democrats' latest presidential debate, and move to the serious, how Democrats have boxed themselves into a corner with their impeachment crusade, and how the prospect of a Senate trial has Republicans salivating and Democrats trembling, though, of course, neither side will admit it. Plus, speaking of trembling, the Democrats might be at the prospect of a couple of remarkable recent polls showing black support for Trump spiking. We'll bring on LibertyNation.com socio-political correspondent Jeff Charles to toss that one around, and Liberty Nation's guardian of individual liberty, Scott Cosenza, jumps on board for Talkin' Liberty.
Say what? Say what? Say what? One more time.
We commence the proceedings as promised with our signature segment, Say What, where we roll out the wacky, astonishing, and damnable things uttered by politicians and the chattering class. For those of us who were there for the early days of Saturday Night Live, that was in many ways a life changer. Late night humor, unparalleled to this day, eviscerating the political class on both sides of the aisle. And while the show for a time veered off into the usual network anti-Trump hatred, they bounced back big time this last week with an hysterical spoof of the latest Democratic presidential debate, exposing, almost in Trump-like fashion, the hard truths about all the party's candidates. So let's dive right into the fun, starting with the on-again, off-again frontrunner and famous fake Indian, Elizabeth Warren, discussing a holiday recipe centered around what we call corn.
Of course, this Thanksgiving, I'll be cooking my specialty, maybe don't say it, the food of my ancestors. Should I say it? I'm going to say maize.
For those of you uninitiated, maize is what Indians called corn. Then they went after Kamala Harris, who's been in a nosedive for months now and desperate for any attention.
Tonight, I'm not going to worry about the polling numbers. I'm just going to have fun and see if I can get some viral moments. Mama needs a GIF.
Well, we're just getting warmed up. How about Amy Klobuchar, the likable enough but ineffectual candidate running in the middle of the pack, but leaving you wondering about all her head movement?
I know some of you think I'm shaking because I'm nervous, but this is just my signature quick quivering bang. Look, I could say a lot about the issues we've talked about tonight, but the sad thing is you're not listening to a word I'm saying because you're just watching my hair dance on my forehead.
Okay, since we've done all female candidates so far, let's round it out with a candidate who was spoiling for a fight with the rest of the candidates.
And let's introduce underdog candidate and tonight's villain, Tulsi Gabbard.
Thank
Thank you, Rachel. What an honor it is to be on this stage with my fellow candidates. I want you to know that I smell your fear, and it makes me stronger. I'm wearing the white suit of your fallen hero, Hillary Clinton. Now fight me, cowards.
Dark and ominous. Now, let's bounce back to the top tier of presidential candidates. How about Mayor Pete Buttigieg, as white as can be and famously unappealing to black voters?
America, I know I can do this because my supporters are a diverse coalition from young to old, gay to straight, white to eggshell. Thank you.
Truth hurts and stings, but now get a load of SNL's take on the guy who has to be the easiest to imitate, Bernie Sanders.
I'm very proud of the fact that I was the first heart attack patient to show up to the emergency room in a city bus. A lot of my opponents like to throw the word socialist around for me. But let me ask you, is it fair that only the top 2% often get a free biscotti with their coffee? Is it fair that when the top 2% want to turn off the lights in their bedroom, all they have to do is clap? They got the clapper. Shouldn't we all have clappers? Either everybody has a clapper or nobody has a clapper. And that's the America I want to live in.
That, my friends, is what you call the truth is in the joke, to be sure. But there's now a new lane on the Democrats' highway to either the White House or hell, controlled by a man who makes Donald Trump look like a pauper in a party that's gone out of its way to demonize the rich.
Did somebody say billionaire?
No, Mayor Bloomberg, how did you get in here?
Well, I tipped the doorman $30 million. I need to quickly throw in some Spanish because Miguel Bloomberg is on fuego.
Oh, the pandering. But, folks, we've saved what I think is the best for last. Saturday Night Live's take on the stumbling, bumbling Joe Biden.
I just want everyone to know, America, I see you. And I see the faces you all make when I talk. You're scared. Scared I'll say something off color or even worse, on color. What I want you to know is you should be scared because I'm always 1 second away from calling Cory Booker Barack. Look, I'm supported by the same coalition that elected Obama. African Americans, even the Mexicaninos and the Chorianos. The hearings have made it clear Donald Trump doesn't want me to be the nominee. Vladimir Putin doesn't want me to be the nominee. Nobody in America wants me to be the nominee. But I am confident that I can win the election in 2016.
So, there you go. The sad sack field of candidates trying to unseat President Trump. And all we can say is they better hope Trump doesn't use any of those sound bites, because I'd actually feel sorry for the state of their mental health when he gets done with them. Quick break, and in just a bit we'll discuss what an impeachment trial in the Senate might look like. Spoiler alert, it's not good for Democrats. But first, we'll talk about that critical mass of voters these Democrats have counted on for years, but may now be ready to support Trump, according to a couple of recent polls. African Americans.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Where can you find honest political commentary with sobering analysis, accountability, deconstructing threats to our liberty, and boldly reporting the truth? Subscribe to the LibertyNation.com YouTube channel, where facts matter.
We believe that
All men are entitled to blessings of liberty.
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
The black vote. It is and always has been crucial to the success of the Democratic Party. Upwards of 90% of black voters have cast their ballots for Democratic presidential candidates for as long as anyone can remember. But new polling data suggests that there might be a crack in the armor, that black voters have taken to a Republican President, Trump, to a degree that we've not seen before. Is this real? Are these voters actually prepared to leave what's been called the Democratic reservation? Could Trump actually break that glass ceiling of single-digit Republican support among black voters? Joining us to help answer these questions is LibertyNation.com socio-political correspondent Jeff Charles. Welcome, Jeff.
Hey, Tim. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. Now, there's a new poll from Rasmussen that puts Trump's approval among black voters at a startling 36%, but other polls, including one from Gallup, place it much lower, around 10%. Which of these figures is more accurate, do you think, and why?
So I kind of looked into the Rasmussen and also the Emerson poll that showed him around like the 34 to 36% range. I'm not quite ready to believe that yet, just because at least one of those polls only spoke with about 150 likely potential black voters. But that being said, I wouldn't be surprised that he would break double digits with black voters, because he's one of the first Republican presidents that has actually tried to speak to black people. It hasn't always gone his way, but black people do see that he's actually trying to reach them. They recently formed the group of Black Voices for Trump. That's a positive sign, because if you look at the previous candidates that we've had, they haven't done anything like that. Like Mitt Romney, for instance, actually shut down Paul Ryan as his VP when he wanted to actually go into black communities and start talking to black voters. His campaign shut that down.
Right.
McCain did a few things here and there, but no Republican president, at least not in recent memory, has actually said, you know what, I want to give it a shot. I want to try to see if I can get some more black voter support. I don't think that Trump is under the impression that he's going to get 30, 40, 50% of the black vote.
Right.
But it's a step in the right direction. It sets an example for future Republican presidential candidates. But even more importantly, it sets a good example for what the GOP itself should be doing.
Well, there's a line of thinking, which I suppose is backed up by numbers, that if Trump can hit double digits at 10%, certainly 12%, that by itself would ruin the Democrats' chances of winning the White House. But Trump's message to blacks in 2016 was, hey, what have you got to lose? Has that, Jeff, ultimately helped him or hurt him?
It goes both ways. I mean, because I think a lot of black people probably saw the point that he was making, even if they still didn't like him. They saw, well, I mean, under Democrats, we haven't been great. But on the other hand, it could kind of come off as insulting. But I think that beyond that, though, like even if we put that to the side, President Trump has done things that would help benefit the black community. Like we talked about the unemployment numbers, but that is such a mixed bag that they don't really give him full credit for that, which no president deserves full credit for the economy. But he's done other things. He's made it easier for black entrepreneurs to start businesses. He's given money to historically black colleges and universities. So I think there is room there for him to get some more votes. Most of his appeal among black voters is to black men. Black women are not feeling him like that, and that's just probably not going to happen. He kind of already has a problem with women voters in general. But some black men are even if they don't like his style, they don't dislike necessarily his policy.
Now, we've seen the record low unemployment numbers among African Americans as well as Hispanics and women and other groups during this Trump era. Do you think those numbers really resonate in the black community, so to speak? I hate to put them all into like they're all in one community, but do those numbers really resonate, do you think, among black voters, or are they just numbers which will have little effect in the upcoming election?
Well, the thing about it is that the unemployment rate in the black community was already going down before Trump. But at the same time, nobody can deny that Trump has had an impact on those numbers. You would be crazy to say that he hasn't had that some of his policies and him increasing consumer confidence in the stock market. You'd be crazy to say that it hasn't had something to do with those falling numbers. If he keeps that up, it's going to get to the point to where they can't say that it was forces outside of, that occurred before he took office that is responsible for that downturn. So if this keeps happening, if the unemployment rate continues to go down, black entrepreneurship, if that starts to go up because he's made it easier, it's going to be harder to deny it. Now, I don't know if that'll happen in time for 2020, but still, it'll show that the policies that he's using, for the most part, are working.
Now, Barack Obama recently said that while he was able to gain intimacy, as he put it, with the electorate, Joe Biden has not been able to do that. So I'm wondering whether you think that Donald Trump has established any real level of what we might call intimacy with the so-called black community through his relationships with the former football great Jim Brown and, of course, famously Kanye West. Plus, you got Diamond and Silk and others. Or whether he's still just seen as mostly just another white conservative.
That is a very tough question to answer because that's going to depend on which black person you're talking to at what point of the day. I mean, I think that him having a friendship with Kanye hasn't hurt him. But I think the thing is he has an uphill battle, not all because of him. Part of it is because of some of the things that he says, but most of it is just the stigma that is on the Republican Party and on Republican presidents. So even if he said nothing, he would still have that uphill battle. So I think it's really going to come down to what Reagan said: are things better for me today than they were before? It's his policy that's going to count. It's going to be the impact that he has. If it's an overall positive impact, then I think that's going to help in the long run.
How about Charlottesville? Does that still have legs? Is that something that is still seen as vile by black people? Do you think, writ large, the way that his comments were flagrantly misinterpreted by the elite media to make it look like he was saying that, white supremacists are just fine with him?
Yeah, I think since that's been exposed, because they didn't just misinterpret it, they just straight out lied, Tim. They lied about what he said. Yep. He very clearly said that he was not talking about white nationalists or white supremacists, and I think that's been exposed enough. Now, they may come up with some other reasons to not like him, but the Charlottesville thing, I think that's failed now. I don't see a whole lot of people on social media or on the airwaves really promoting that because it has been so thoroughly debunked.
Okay, Jeff. Well, thanks for your input. I appreciate it. And we'll stay on this subject as the election approaches because the degree to which Donald Trump might be able to peel off more black voters might have a lot to say about his chances for re-election. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
That is Jeff Charles, socio-political correspondent for LibertyNation.com. Quick break. And then we're back to discuss why Republicans are salivating and Democrats trembling at the prospect of an impeachment trial in the United States Senate.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Liberty Nation Gen Z. Becoming a strong defender of freedom and liberty doesn't just happen, it's taught. LN Gen Z is your portal for news that's hot, engaging articles without the spin. Go to lngenz.com for riveting videos that foster critical thinking. Download worksheets and quizzes for each age level. At lngenz.com, the future starts today. Combating propaganda. Defending freedom. lngenz.com. A free-thinking future starts here.
Far more important than my political future and far more important than yours, the well-being of our country.
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Democrats have boxed themselves into a corner with an impeachment crusade they commenced the day Donald Trump was inaugurated or even before. And as their impeachment inquiry nears its climax over these holidays, Republicans in the Senate should be licking their chops at the opportunity standing before them, while Democrats should be afraid, very afraid. Trump's opponents have shot their load with the impeachment hearings and now stand on the precipice of a fateful decision on whether to actually impeach this president. While Nancy Pelosi still has escape valves, foremost among them a censure instead of an impeachment, thus avoiding a Senate trial, there's few indications that they plan to back down. But on the other side of the aisle, far from feeling weighed down by the prospect of defending Trump's freewheeling politics of international diplomacy, this impeachment obsession has liberated Republican leaders to step up and defend a president whose popularity in the GOP has actually risen during the impeachment process. But it goes well beyond that. Trump and his allies have been forced to absorb relentless, scurrilous attacks and spectacular, unsubstantiated allegations against this president for as long as he's occupied the Oval Office. And a prospective Senate trial will provide them the perfect platform to seek their well-earned revenge. Just imagine the witnesses they could call and their chance to explore substantiated narratives left unexplored by the left's handmaidens in the media. And importantly, much of what they can expose we already know. No further investigation, for example, is required to know that Joe Biden's son Hunter profited from his father's position to the tune of millions of dollars from his Ukrainian benefactors, despite having no credentials. We know the former vice president arranged the firing of the prosecutor investigating his son's company. We also know Ukrainian officials dug up dirt leading to the prosecution of Trump aide Paul Manafort, and they made public statements condemning Trump during the 2016 campaign. We've long been aware that the Obama Justice Department and intelligence officials surveilled the Trump campaign. That means they spied on him. We've seen the breathtakingly hateful messages between Peter Strzok and Lisa Page about Trump and the insurance policy to make certain Trump would never get elected. We know from multiple hearings and sources and testimony that James Comey, John Brennan, James Clapper, and the whole bunch of them were willing to take extraordinary measures to stop Trump from winning the election and prevent his fledgling administration from gaining traction. This line of inquiry would be particularly attractive for the GOP, with news that the Justice Department Inspector General is scheduled to release his report on FISA abuse by Obama's FBI on December 9th. And though the report may not reach truly damning conclusions, it will provide for sure a teachable moment for the electorate and an ideal confluence of events for the GOP. Now, the full picture on surveillance of the Trump campaign will come later with the results of the investigation by Attorney General William Barr and lead investigator John Durham. Then, of course, there's Adam Schiff and the House Democrats who finally pulled the trigger on impeachment after threatening to do so for years. Schiff, who's still gagging on his words of assurance that he had proof of Trump-Russia collusion that apparently no one else had. And, by the way, he concluded the 2-week-long impeachment hearings with an impassioned soliloquy on how Trump's crimes are worse than those which forced the resignation of Richard Nixon. Indeed, Adam Schiff has left himself wide open to being called as a witness in the Senate trial. Now, how would Schiff explain away the fact that the infamous whistleblower, whose identity Schiff unconvincingly claimed not to know, kicked off the complaint process by contacting Schiff's office? And how about the relationship between the suspected but widely known whistleblower and the Democratic Party, including Joe Biden? These established ties suggest a politically motivated charge from a deep state operative frustrated over his growing irrelevance to the point of trying to take down a sitting president. Now, all of this is not to say that Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and Lindsey Graham and their fellow Republican senators will necessarily pursue all of these paths of inquiry, but rather that they possess a virtual smorgasbord of potent narratives from which to choose. McConnell could choose to drag the trial out for maximum unmasking of the Democrats' treasure trove of indiscretions. This would give him the added benefit of taking 5 Democratic senators running for president, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, Amy Klobuchar, Kamala Harris, and Cory Booker, off the campaign trail while they serve as jurors and likely damaging their candidacies. But McConnell could also opt for a truncated, a shortened trial and a quick verdict in order to avoid looking overly political and to magnify Trump's inevitable exoneration. By overplaying their hand, insisting on the removal of a president for actions that might widely be deemed inappropriate but hardly impeachable, Democrats are now on the verge of not only losing the issue, but also having it turned against them with the same level of force they used in their 3-year impeachment crusade, which is now reaching its climax. By demonstrating an unwillingness to let the voters decide on the magnitude of the issue, the Democrats, once they assemble and vote on actual articles of impeachment, will have shot their load many months before the voters go to the polls. And where the process goes from there to the Republican-controlled Senate should be, of course, particularly troubling for the Democrats. Any way you cut it, the political possibilities presented to Republicans in a Senate trial are deliciously tempting. It is now just a matter of which among this embarrassment of riches they choose to present to voters preparing to cast their ballots in less than 1 year. We'll take a quick break and come back with Talkin' Liberty.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
And now it is time to welcome in our regular contributor, constitutional lawyer and LibertyNation.com legal affairs director Scott Cosenza for the portion of the program which we entitle Talkin' Liberty. Hello, Scott.
Tim, from the very cradle of liberty is where I join you today.
You're talking about San Francisco, or?
No, Tim. That's the Rice-A-Roni town. I'm in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, sir.
Oh, that cradle of liberty. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Now that we've clarified things and why you would voluntarily go to Philadelphia, I don't know. Did you win the second prize in that contest? You know, the first prize is 1 week in Philadelphia.
You're lucky you're not. You talk to me like that at a distance only, okay? I'll have you know that, all right?
Fighting words for the man from Philadelphia and guardian of individual liberty. So, Scott, let's jump right into this ruling by a federal judge, a district judge, and that's important to point it out because there'll be other layers of appeal available to the White House. But a district judge has ruled in the case of Don McGahn, counselor to the president, that there is no absolute immunity from testifying before Congress for members of the president's White House staff. This is a potentially significant ruling if it survives all the way up the chain.
Tim, this is the House Judiciary Committee suit against Don McGahn, the president's official lawyer. We often hear talk of Rudy Giuliani and others as his personal lawyer. This is from the White House counsel's office, paid for by the taxpayer dollars to represent the office of the presidency. And they want his testimony on some impeachment inquiry matters, sent him a subpoena to secure that testimony. And he said, or the White House said, they have absolute immunity and do not need to send their people down there to testify. Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson says the Democrats, the Judiciary Committee is right, that the president does not have absolute immunity for these people to not have to go before the Congress. Now, there's been some misreporting I've seen, I think, Tim, that leads people to believe that the judge in this case has said something about, that he'll lose the attorney-client privilege or something like that. No, Mr. McGahn may go down there and present himself to testify and then say nothing at all and assert those privileges in person. But he cannot simply not show up. That's what this ruling says.
So obviously the White House has done this because they're sick of being subpoenaed and turning over millions of documents like they did for this whole Russia collusion thing. And so they're saying, no, we're not going to go for another one of these fishing expeditions. they also say, and I think legitimately so, that privileged communications between members of the president's staff, if those are revealed, it puts a real damper on the kind of advice and consent that the president can get in the privacy of his office. So how legitimate are either or both of those arguments?
Well, I think the second argument does not carry any water, because this argument does not touch privileged communications. All it says is that you have to go to the hearing room and assert the privilege. You can't just phone it in and say, "Oh, these are privileged. I'm not going to talk to you," which is the appropriate form, I think. I always laugh, Tim, when I hear about the news of these congressional things from time to time. I hear about a filibuster, but it wasn't a filibuster. They just said that they were going to filibuster, so they never actually put the legislation forth. And you think, oh, gee, how lazy. Well, this is sort of the same thing. You can't assert a privilege without actually asserting it. And this absolute immunity thing, this actually is an invention of the sort of Harriet Miers Justice Department. And carried over, in a sense. That's when it was first asserted. At least that's according to Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, who wrote about it in her opinion supporting the ruling. And she finds there's just no grant in history or our Constitution or law for such an absolute immunity grant. And I have to say, as I read the opinion, I did find it rather compelling on that point.
Okay, well, let's move to where you are, Pennsylvania, where the Supreme Court has ruled the Fifth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution bars people from being forced to turn over their personal passwords to police.
Tim, as I talk to you now, I'm looking at the first home of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, which predates our United States Supreme Court. It's a building known to many as Independence Hall. And the justices did a great thing for liberty and independence here in a very tough case. And I say it's a tough case because it involves child pornography, and we know that often uncomfortable facts make for bad rulings in law because oftentimes, you can imagine the pressures involved. So, Tim, what we have here is a person whose computer's been seized by law enforcement. They believe that they will find child pornography on that computer if they got access to it. The defendant has refused to input the password, and they say that he's legally compelled to do so. The police and just the prosecuting authorities say that the defendant has to put in the password. Well, it's sort of like keys or keys to a locked filing cabinet or a combination to a safe is how the prosecution's office wants the court to process these requests. And in those instances, you have to produce those. So you don't have a Fifth Amendment right, Tim, to keep your safe. If you have a safe in your office with some books in it and the IRS or some other agency wants to look at those books and they have a reason in law to do so, you can't not give up that that combination of the safe or those keys to the filing cabinet. But the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, Tim, here has created a major decision where they've said that these passwords are not the same thing as a keys to the safe, as it were, and that we have a privacy interest in them, and that the court that individuals cannot be compelled to turn it over. And I think it's a great ruling for liberty. This combined, Tim, with the case we reported on, I think it was 2 weeks ago, where we now see that at border crossings, rather, they don't have the right to inspect your electronic devices absent some reasonable suspicion, at least, or probable cause. I think that, the last couple of weeks has seen a great deal of movement in a positive direction for individual liberty in the electronic sphere and digital privacy.
Well, no question there must have been tremendous pressure to give in on this case based on the fact that it was the worst kind of crime in people's minds, child pornography. So this is where the rubber meets the road when it comes to making legal rulings. You have to base it on the principle and the law and the Constitution, and not on how you want the case to turn out. It can't be outcome-based judging, is what you're saying. And we've talked about that frequently. Okay, let's move out to the West Coast now. In Oregon, where cops are no longer allowed to routinely turn traffic stops into criminal investigations, which I think it's shocking to know that they'd been allowed to do that up to now.
Well, that, Tim, is very popular, and it's really instituted with the drug war. That's when police started to become entrepreneurial about these things. That you combine that, Tim, with the fact that so many towns and cities and states rely on these ticketing apparatuses for a great deal of their funding. And you see you've got a positive feedback loop or a negative feedback loop for Liberty's perspective. And I think it's a great – unfortunately, by the way, what happens with most of these stops is they really the ignorant suffer more than any. For the sophisticated person who has a sense of what the law is and what the powers of police are, they feel much more confident telling the police to go mind their business and let them be on their way. But the fewer years of formal education a person has, and you can imagine, this plays right into the sort of basically it's poor black and brown people. They get it the worst. Not to mention the underclass generally. So they're also the ones that are more likely to have interaction previously with the criminal justice system and kind of increase that loop. So I think it's a great thing. Nothing in this ruling which says that investigative activities conducted during a traffic stop, need to be have limits. If a cop gets a hinky vibe, Tim, if he thinks there's criminal activity afoot, he's encouraged and should go ahead and investigate that. That's not what this is about. This is about, as a matter of course, treating every interaction like, okay, let's try to generate an arrest here from just because we can. And as you've pointed out so many times before, you can't operate a car without violating the law for more than a mile or so. There are so many. So
you've been going 2 miles an hour over the speed limit, sir. And by the way, while I've got you, you've been beating your kids lately? How about your wife? Have you been saying libelous things about your boss at work? That's the kind of thing.
How about you drove your mom to the doctor's office and she left her prescription bottle in the side pocket of the door and didn't tell you about it and didn't leave you a notarized prescription to be able to possess opioids, and the cop searches the car and finds them because you gave him permission because you're not a wrongdoer and you thought you were doing the right thing by letting them search, and now you're in prison. That's the kind of thing that gets people hemmed up, for real.
Now, one more story. There's only 2 states in the country that prohibit the ownership of stun guns and tasers. Those are Rhode Island and Hawaii, and now Rhode Island's ban on stun guns has been challenged in federal court.
Our heroes, Tim, are Michael O'Neill and Nicolo Grasso, who filed the claim. And I think it's important to talk about because the struggle is not just for deadly force in terms of the right to keep and bear arms. While there's no right to a stun gun in the Constitution like there is to keep and bear arms, this is one of those things where they won't even let these people have less than lethal protection. And I just think it's shocking that that's where we are with so many people who want to remove from adults the ability to be able to protect themselves. It won't stop at guns.
All right. Well, thank you, Scott, and enjoy your time, however difficult that might be in Philadelphia. Enjoy the fullness of your Thanksgiving holiday.
Happy Thanksgiving to you and everyone listening, Tim.
This program, Liberty Nation Radio and LibertyNation.com's own podcasts, The Uprising, hosted by Scott, no matter where he is, and The Rabbit Hole, Politics and Prose with Mark Angelides, where past is prologue. All available on demand at LibertyNation.com. So we wish all of you a joyous Thanksgiving weekend and hope to see you back here next week. In the meantime, this is Tim Donner saying stand up for liberty. Have a great weekend.